Welcome to 80s TV Ladies, part of the Weirding Way Media Network.
80s TV ladies, so sexy and so pretty. 80s TV ladies, in and out and through the city. 80s TV ladies, often treated kind of working hard for the money in a man's world. 80s TV ladies.
Hello, and welcome to 80s TV Ladies. I'm Susan Lambert-Haddam.
And I'm Sharon Johnson. We're here to talk to you about female-driven television shows from the 1980s.
We're wrapping up our series of episodes on Cagney and Lacey, and we got to talk with the most incredible stars and creators of this show.
We dived into all these amazing interviews, which gave us incredible gifts and insight into the show. We still had a lot to say about this show and some questions that we decided to end our season with.
A little bow on it.
Yes.
This is our last season. Our last season. No, it's not.
No, it's not. Hopefully not.
Told you. This is our last episode,
yes,
Sharon.
Episode, yes.
Of season 1. I can't believe it's 23 episodes.
I can't either. It seems like yesterday that we started this, let alone we've got 23 episodes. This is 23rd episode. It's amazing.
Episode. And I was like, Sharon, we'll do 16 and then we'll see how we feel. I'd planned for 16 and then we were going to sort of regroup. And we just blew right past that.
But we were so lucky to get these amazing guests. Of course, we had to share them and make room for them in our plans. And, you know, plans are there to be changed.
I'm telling you, in season 2, we've got all sorts of plans for season 2, and who knows what's going to happen.
We're not sure either, so we'll see. But so far, it's all worked out for us. So
yeah, we're lining up some amazing guests for season 2, and I can't believe it. It's been such a gift. I want to thank Kevin. I want to thank Melissa, who's joining us today by Zoom with her mom. Hi, beautiful mom.
Hi, ladies.
Hi, ladies. And I want to thank Sharon. Thank you for saying yes to me when I asked you to do this crazy thing.
Well, thank you for asking. This has been so much fun.
I got to tell you, I was excited about it, but I didn't know what I was getting into exactly. So you never know. But I was like, who can I just chat with that knows more about television than I do? And it was you, Sharon. So thank you for joining and being game when it was just you and me trying to run sound.
Yeah, that was fun.
No one's ever going to hear that episode.
It's all been such a great learning experience, and we still have so much more to learn, not just about podcasting, but especially about 80s TV. And here I thought I knew so much, and I have learned so much over this first season.
I thought there were a lot of shows to look at, but there were even more. Once you start, you discover there's more, and then more to say and more people to talk to. And I'm just so thrilled about the interviews we've gotten and the interviews we're lining up. Anyway, so this is our wrap up for the Cagney and Lacey series of episodes. If you're just joining us today, you can start right here at this episode because this is going to be kind of an overview of the series. Or you can head back to episode 17 and start with our interview with Barney Rosenzweig, part 1, the creator of Cagney and Lacey. And go from there. Cagney and Lacey was a police procedural drama that ran on CBS from 1982 to 1988.
It starred Sharon Gless and Tyne Daly as 2 women detectives and partners in the New York Police Department.
It was based on a TV movie that aired in 1981, which ended up being basically a backdoor pilot to the show. That TV movie starred Loretta Swit as Christine Cagney and Tyne Daly as Mary Beth Lacey.
And then there are the 6 lost episodes with Meg Foster, who was Cagney number 2, but the first Cagney in the series as opposed to the TV movie that Loretta Swit starred in.
Yeah, so they sort of made a quarter of a season of typical shows at that point, picked it up with Meg Foster replacing Loretta Swit, and she was very good. And so we'll talk about, Barney calls them the 6 lost episodes. Because, of course, then the show was going to be canceled. And then Barney was fighting hard for it. And it came back for season 2. But they made him recast. And so they said, Meg Foster has to go. You need a new Cagney. And they went back to the first Cagney they wanted to hire, that Barbara Corday, the writer, also creator of the show, who was married to Barney at the time, had seen and said Sharon Gless should be Cagney early on. And Barney was like, who? But then he watched something with her, a TV movie, I believe, and was like, yes, I'd like her. But he couldn't get her. He couldn't get her for the TV movie. So they cast Loretta Swit from MASH. And then he couldn't get her when it got picked up to series. He tried to get her, but she was going on Housecalls to replace somebody amazing.
Lynn Redgrave.
Lynn Redgrave. And Sharon Gless talks about Housecalls in the book that she wrote called Apparently There Were Complaints. She talks about how much she did not want to replace Lynn Redgrave, an American icon of an actress. It was about a hospital administrator. Lynn Redgrave played a hospital administrator.
Butted heads with the male lead, who I believe was
Wayne Rogers.
Yes, from MASH, yes.
Yes, also from MASH, who got out of his contract, I guess, early enough.
Well, he left the show very early. I want to say 5th or 6th season, something like that. It's hard to know because that show ran for 11 seasons.
Yes. They were replacing Lynn Redgrave following the birth of her child. She wanted to be able to breastfeed her daughter. And they were like, nope. And they were like, you're holding out for more money or something. And around the same time, I believe that Shirley was leaving Laverne and Shirley for some of the same reasons. So there you go, women in the workplace.
Clearly, there weren't enough women around to be able to say, "Excuse me, yeah, this is a real thing, and yeah, we should work around this because this is something very important." But because to men, obviously, it's not a big deal.
Yes. So. But I will say that Sharon Gless tells some insider scoop in her book about some of this, not all of it. Because again, she was under contract with Universal. They could basically say, go do this. And it was very hard for her to say no. But she did not enjoy the experience with her co-star. It didn't sound like in the book very much. So moving on. But it turns out Housecalls did not do well with the Lynn Redgrave leaving the show and all of that controversy around that. And so it was canceled just in time for Sharon Gless to join Cagney and Lacey. And she still said no, apparently, when they went back around, except that her now manager, who used to be her boss at Universal, the head of casting, Monique James, said, let's go to lunch with Barney.
And this is where I recommend that you listen to part 2 of our episode with Barney, because he talks about this whole process and what actually happened that allowed him to get Sharon Gless into the show this time. It's a great story.
It is a great story. And what's kind of amazing is, given that there were now 3 Cagneys, I had sort of forgotten that. It was one of the surprises in starting to look back at that show to realize, wait, it wasn't always Sharon Gless, because she obviously went on to be Christine Cagney for the rest of the run for 7 seasons, 124 episodes, 4 TV movies after that. So the show really became that show.
Mm-hmm.
Even though it had these iconic moments before with these other 2 very amazing actresses. So that has really fascinated me. The 3 Cagneys was a huge discovery for me. I guess people that watched all of Cagney and Lacey at the time probably noticed. But I was pretty young. I watched the show. I remember the show. I liked the characters. I didn't really care that much about like the adult world. It felt very adult. I was definitely more in the comedy, action. I was basically a kid. So
I'm in a similar situation in that I was aware of it. You couldn't not be aware of it. I don't remember why it wasn't part of my steady TV diet, but I certainly knew about it. How could you not if you paid any attention to television? I do remember it winning Emmys year after year after year after year.
yes.
And I've always loved certainly both of the lead actresses. They're just so great on the show and just so great in general. And not just because we had them on our podcast.
Yeah. And in revisiting this show, I appreciate it so much more. I appreciated the 2 women cops. And I think that was definitely a draw for me even as a kid. Like, these are women doing a really interesting job in a time when there weren't a lot of female cops. certainly not two that would be A, detectives and be partnered together. I think it was really amazing that they were detectives. I'm not sure there were any actual NYPD female detectives at the time. And I went and researched this for a little bit back when we really first started. And I remember going, okay, were there any women cops? And there were. There were women cops in the NYPD. There were early cops from the 40s, female cops from the 40s in New York, but they were pretty rare. And then again, in the 60s and 70s, there started to be more. In the late 70s, the NYPD apparently realized they needed more diversity in their ranks and felt that that would be helpful, as it would be. And so they started actually recruiting women and minorities actively recruiting women and minorities for the police force. And then the numbers started to climb, but they were still pretty low. But many, women told the actresses after the fact that Cagney and Lacey made them want to be a cop. Tyne said, if she was like, don't do it. Or in an interview I read, she wanted to say, don't do that. Don't join the cop force. But anyway, not based on a TV show, but, people have done more for less.
Yeah, but it is one of the things that television can do, open your mind or open your world up to possibilities. So whether it encouraged women to become cops or step into other roles that they hadn't necessarily thought were for them, I think, the Cagneys and Lacey's and other shows can play a role in helping women see, and certainly then helping women see, hey, maybe there's room for me in that world.
Yes. And then I do remember in the research, just to go back, is that it took a long time for them to actually start promoting women. What they realized was that women quickly realized they weren't being promoted and then they would leave.
Figure.
Yeah. Isn't that a surprise? So the fact that they were detectives, which meant they had been promoted from the beat cop, right? They had earned their right to be in that squad.
And Christine's a sergeant.
Yes. And actually goes to become a sergeant during the run of the show.
And makes it.
Yes. And then she wants to be lieutenant. The Christine Cagney character, and that's the interesting thing. It was also ambition, watching women be ambitious and want something in the workplace, particularly a workplace that isn't particularly welcoming to that, clearly. And that she wanted to be one of the boys. She wanted to become lieutenant. She wanted to move up. She was a very ambitious person and cop.
And was not shy about it. I mean, I think she said on more than one occasion, her ultimate goal was to be police commissioner. That's what she was striving for, hoping, working towards in her work life.
And you watch them both move up and get accolades over the run of the show. And I thought that was really interesting, and that one would get something and the other wouldn't. The idea that two women would work together in a high pressure job as partners was just something you did not see on television. And you still don't see a lot of it on television, because even when there's a female cop, it's like, well, we'll partner them with a guy because that's going to be, but you see a lot of two guys being cops. I mean, it's very interesting. They've sort of talked about rebooting this show several times. I'm still not sure why it isn't or hasn't been. You could
reboot it.
Yeah.
Well, absolutely. I think of the original Law and Order because that's really the only one that I watch. And I don't think they have ever had a series regular female cop. There was a point during the latter part of the first iteration when there were a couple of women, I think, that came and went.
Yeah.
But not as a series. It's always been men. They yes, they brought in Lieutenant Van Buren, but not, I'm talking about the two cops who are out running around trying to solve the crime. And it would have been nice if when they did the reboot, they had either made one of the two cops female, sure, go ahead and make the lieutenant a man again, or made the lead prosecutor a woman and not a man again. I don't think we've ever had the lead prosecutor on that show.
Should she not get to move up? I wasn't.
No, the DA was a woman. It was
Diane Wiest was.
Yes, Diane Wiest, exactly. She was the DA. but they've never had the lead prosecutor be a woman.
Mm.
And this was a perfect time to do one of those two things, and they didn't for whatever reason. Well, I think
we know the reason.
when they did bring it back, they did bring back as many of the actors who were playing those roles, or at least one of the two cops they brought back, Anthony Anderson, had been on Law and Order before he did Blackish. So they brought him back. And I don't know if that was to try to get people interested or, hey, Anthony Anderson's back. We're bringing him back, and we're bringing Sam Waterston back. Love Sam Waterston, but nevertheless. And then all the other people were new. So maybe that was their way of saying, okay, we've got some continuity here. But then after the first season, Anthony Anderson left. They could have brought in a female cop to replace him, but they didn't. So I just think that there were some opportunities missed there.
Yeah, and not just in that show. There's Rizzoli and Isles. Rizzoli and Isles.
That's correct.
Correct.
Rizzoli and Isles.
Rizzoli and Isles.
Which I have just recently started watching, and I like it.
It hit the time when I wasn't watching that much television. So I didn't start it then. So diving into shows now, clearly now I'm only doing it for the podcast. I'm spending my time in the 80s right now, deep in the 80s. There was a British show that somebody was recommending. I think one of our listeners recommended Scott and Bailey, which was a British show with two women, a drama series. They investigate murders in Manchester's police department. And then I was just in terms of like women working together in the workplace, like Parks and Rec was really pretty interesting to me in that, it was really the Leslie Knope show in a lot of ways, but the ensemble had a lot of female love in that show, but also the friendships within that workplace very much centered around the women. I also think of Glow as another women in the workplace show.
I loved Glow. I liked Glow a lot.
Yeah. And Hacks is women in the workplace. The dynamic is pretty different for that, but and then Abbott Elementary. And over the years, we've had a lot of the female friendship shows, not as many as I think we should have, but, Laverne and Shirley and I Love Lucy and Golden Girls and Designing Women. Now, Designing Women was great because it was both, right?
Exactly.
Designing Women was great because it was both women in the workplace and they were friends. It was sort of one of the reasons they worked together. They were related and they were friends.
Although it's not, they never were real clear on when it came to Charlene and Annie Potts' character. Again, this is my day for not remembering names of people and characters. Whether they knew each other, how they knew each other before they started this business. It seemed like the show started, the beginning of the show was sort of at the beginning of Sugar Bakers, but they never, and not that they had to, but I don't know that they ever explained how they all
came together.
Yeah.
Like it felt to me like Mary Jo, just to jump to Designing Women.
There we go, Mary Jo.
That
yes.
Mary Jo, Annie Potts' character in Designing Women had been hired, that she was an interior designer that they had hired. We haven't dived into that show. We might soon, sometime, maybe even next season.
But it's so clear that they are friends at the time that we meet them.
Yes.
But we never get the backstory of we never got that episode of how we all met kind of thing.
Anyway, but back to Cagney and Lacey. The style of the show felt more 70s than 80s to me.
Of Cagney and Lacey?
Of Cagney and Lacey. Certainly the early seasons. I mean, obviously the TV movie was aired in 1981, meant that it was sold in 1979 and made in 1980, right? So that had a real 70s feel to it, the TV movie with Rhoda Swett, and I appreciated that. The show was not quite that edgy and gritty. It was, sort of a little bit filtered down for television series, but it has that Lou Grant feel, that Hill Street Blues feel. It's not quite as slick as Hill Street Blues. I actually found it more kind of rough around the edges, and it felt kind of, it wasn't a lot of run and gun. They had their moments of running, around and, holding their pistols out. Freeze, sucker. No. They never really said that. But
Not the sucker part anyway.
No. But it felt more like actual police work, detective work. They were on the phone far more often than they were chasing a suspect.
Oh, yeah, by far. They did a lot of legwork, which you could call it legwork, but really it was talking on the phone work.
Yeah, and
calling
interviews
people.
and calling
Yeah.
people and tracking down people and, well, here's the information we got and just exchanging information and making a new plan. And I thought that was a more realistic portrayal of what, investigative work is. And the other thing that I kind of liked about this show, and I was reminded watching it, is how much television was the only thing we had like the internet. It was a way to inform people of what was happening in the world. It was a way for you to learn about things. And I'm thinking of the microwave oven episode. It's not an episode. It's a scene that got pulled out from season 4, episode 11, 1984.
It's a funny scene.
It's another sort of exposition scene. And yet the other story that's going on in that scene is that Mary Beth Lacey is teaching the lieutenant how to use a microwave. And I was like, wait, now come on. People had microwaves then? Did we have? I'm trying to remember when we got a microwave, but the 80s was when microwaves were going into people's homes. At the time that episode aired, only 35% of households in the United States had a microwave. And so a lot of people didn't know how they worked. And so I am sure that part of that was, look at this cool thing, this cool new thing, and here's how it works. And that there was probably a lot, maybe paid by GE or Kenmore, maybe those guys sidling up going, hey, wouldn't it be cool if you put a microwave in this scene?
And I thought it was so cute, the way the lieutenant was just so gleeful about it. And he kept using it throughout the subsequent episodes and seasons, and his little microwave behind his desk. And he was just so giddy about it.
And I forgot to write it down, but there's an earlier episode where Mary Beth is somewhere and she sees a microwave and she sort of almost pets it. Like she's like, oh, what's that? Like it's not in the station house. It's somewhere else. And you're like, oh yeah, that's like if we, the first time you saw a Tesla, like you'd be like, oh, well, look at that new car.
I must confess, I resisted getting a microwave for the longest time. I feel like I was probably one of the very last 5% of people in the United States who finally broke down and bought a microwave. I don't know what was holding me back. Probably the same thing that held me back from getting an answering machine for a long time. I just refused to get one. I didn't see the need.
Junior year, I lived off campus in an apartment and we had a microwave and there was no stove in there, right? We didn't have a stove because it was an unfurnished apartment and we didn't buy one because we were college students. So we had literally a little burner.
And inexplicably in Los Angeles, landlords were not required to provide utility things like stoves and refrigerators, which moving here from somewhere else, I found just mind-boggling. I still to this day don't understand.
It was a joke that we lived without a stove. I was there for a year and a half in that apartment. And it was just funny. My little burner and a microwave. I mean, that's what you kind of can live on in college.
Oh, absolutely.
You really couldn't boil water on that burner. Like, you were lucky if you could, I don't know, fry an egg. Okay, so we're going to take a little break and come back. We'll be right back. All right, Sharon, welcome back. The police somebody went to Cagney and Lacey and said to the network and said, could you please have Cagney wear her seatbelt? Because apparently they would jump in the car and start going. And Tyne Daly, I think as just an actress, had just decided that Mary Beth would buckle up, but Christine Cagney didn't. And so apparently traffic officers were pulling people over and saying, you're not wearing your seatbelt and you should be wearing your seatbelt. And they say, well, Cagney and Lacey don't wear one. So they finally wrote it into the script a little bit where, Cagney was like, I don't wear my seatbelt. And Mary Beth finally was like, Christine, buckle up or I'm not starting the car. And the fact that they did that, I just think that's fascinating. It's like,
Well, certainly
affected how people
Yeah.
were going to live their lives,
Yeah.
how these characters behaved on television.
And at some point, networks stopped letting people smoke on TV for a similar reason. Yes.
That's what I was going to say. The first season, Tyne Daly, Mary Beth Lacey is smoking in almost every episode. She's like, hello, Harvey, I'm home. And you're like, what? Was that allowed? And I had forgotten that people smoke on television until, again, the Lung Association basically said, could you please stop having characters smoke on television? And finally, you don't see it. And for good reason.
It's really disconcerting when you do see it, whether it be an old episode like Cagney and Lacey or something like that, or The Tonight Show. There's Johnny puffing away throughout
right. I forgot.
on camera. And before he started smoking between commercial breaks, and sometimes you'd see him putting a cigarette out as they come back from commercial.
Oh my God, that's so funny. Well, and it's just so funny in the episode because Harvey's like, from our anniversary, I want you to stop smoking. Because I just heard these. Didn't you read about the new news reports? And again, here's where I think television felt a responsibility to impart information, which is so interesting because I don't think that's a lot of discussion now because we have the internet. We have so many other ways to impart information.
And I don't know that there's the kind of
impact,
low-hanging fruit, if you will, like stop smoking cigarettes and certainly alcohol has been taken off of television, at least advertising, let alone seatbelts, things like that. For the most part, you will not see that on network television or even on any television, even in movies, really, unless it's like a period piece. But if you watch something that's contemporary, you're not going to see people necessarily smoking or drinking. Well, maybe drinking, but it's not real alcohol. But they're going to put their seatbelts on. They're unless they're a bad guy or something.
Yeah, unless they're making a point.
Yeah.
Every other normal person puts on a seatbelt. And also, I know Designing Women did this too when they gave Mary Beth Lacey breast cancer, which I think Tyne Daly was a little bit upset about because the show took a turn into that soap opera element, which inevitably made the women on the show, instead of being heroic, they also became heroic victims. And so they went through breast cancer and alcoholism and rape. And, I think it's important, like in the show, I think it fits the show that that stuff happened. It didn't feel like, of course not, because it was also what women were going through, what everybody was going through in terms of how are you going to address this unless you make it personal for these characters. But at the same time, I totally see her point that Tyne Daly had when we talked to her of, I signed up to be the hero. I signed up to be the buddy cop show. I signed up to run and solve crimes and yes, have a personal life and be a real person. But I didn't necessarily sign up to do, 6 episodes on my breast cancer and be crying, and worried all the time. But at the same time, when you watch those episodes now, you recognize that they are imparting information about breast cancer to women, that they are making sure women know, you could have, they literally give her, well, you can do this. You should get a second opinion. You can do this. I mean, there's lots of things. And it was sort of an ongoing issue in a couple of episodes of Cagney and Lacey. But I like that she misses the sergeant's exam in order to treat her breast cancer. So Mary Beth doesn't get to take the sergeant's exam at the time that was optimal to take it because of that. And again, I know that, that was a cool, dramatic thing to do, but it was also a realistic thing that people who are facing health crises have to work around that in their workspace, and it doesn't always work out for them. Mm-hmm. And particularly women who are juggling a lot, particularly if they have families.
Yeah.
I liked that the show felt that responsibility, and you see it when you're watching it again and recognizing how important television was to imparting information to us as a culture. And also in some of the, there's a couple of episodes that very lightly touch on LGBTQ issues and all the issues that Cagney and Lacey touches on. And they're very thoughtfully. again, I thought the show was very thoughtful and mindful for mid-80s.
Well, I think they're thoughtful and mindful for today because the way that they handle a lot of these, for lack of a better word, issues, these storylines that you could consider to be hot button or issue or whatever, I was blown away by how well they handle it. The episode where, as Lacey is expecting her third child, they have to go and try to do some crowd control at an abortion clinic. And we find out later through a conversation she's having with her husband that she had an abortion when she was late teens, early 20s. And it's clear that he knows the whole story, which is in and of itself great.
Pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Yes. Harvey.
Yeah.
Pretty awesome.
Oh, Harvey's
Pretty awesome husband.
Yeah, Harvey's the greatest
Material.
TV husband of all time.
Harvey,
He really is.
definitely.
He just is.
But in any event, at the end of that conversation, I was just like, wow, I don't know that I've ever seen that kind of discussion between a husband and wife handled so well. I was blown away by how well written this show is, and especially the way they handle a lot of things like this and some of the language that they used. I remember when in the episode called Violation, where a 16-year-old boy ends up in Rikers over the weekend because he gave a fake name and ends up getting sexually assaulted. Oh, I mean, and not just that, but the parents are suing the department, and Cagney and Lacey go to talk to them because they want to talk to the kid to try to find out who did this to him so
Right.
that they can be prosecuted. And the father will not let them in the house. He's like, no. And as they finally give up and they're leaving, he uses, I'm not even sure I can say this on our podcast, but he uses the word. And I thought, I don't know that I've ever heard that word used on television then, or certainly not since. It was stunning, but it was also true to its time. That would be a word that would be bandied about without anybody really thinking twice about it. So
That is so interesting. And there has been some talk when Barney would talk about putting in words that he knew would not get through. The network would end up fighting over that. And he'd be like, oh, okay, I'll give up on that. And then he'd get in either words or situations that he wanted to get in.
yeah, he liked to stack the deck a little bit so that he had something.
He had
some
something to
cards
give
play.
away.
Yes.
Oh, okay. If you make me, I'll give this up. Oh, but I'm slipping these three others right through you, but come on, you got to let me keep this, and this was made for adults.
Mhm.
This was a show made for adults. And I think working adults, like people who were juggling busy lives
Right.
and that could appreciate the complexity of the stories that they're telling. The subtlety of some of the storytelling is really still striking because it's not flashy.
Mm-hmm.
It's covering controversial topics, but in a really subtle way. What I love about it is that it is addressing the complexity of the human condition in those stories, that there's not necessarily a right answer or a wrong answer, but the answer you get to is that people have to do what they have to do to get by. And it's none of your business, basically. like that was sort of the thing, that it's not on you to judge what other people have to do.
Mm-hmm.
Whether that's abortion, whether that's surviving alcoholism or sexual assault or rape or breast cancer or whatever, that there's not an easy answer.
But even in the smaller, if you will, stories, forgive me, I can't remember what episode it is, but we find out that the lieutenant is estranged from his son. Son shows up at the station and is trying to talk to his father, and it's clear they're just, they can't seem to talk to each other. And the son sort of throws out, yeah, I'm now married, and no, you didn't get invited to the wedding. So the lieutenant's like, okay. So he goes out to lunch with his ex-wife, and they have this conversation that sounded like a conversation that people would have. They weren't overt about it. He's just sort of indirectly trying to get information and trying to talk to her about it, but they're not really dealing with the real issue, if you will. They're just kind of talking around everything. And I thought, well, that's how people talk. They're not going to, well, he didn't tell me and I'm upset. Well, you're upset because of this. And, it was clear that that's not what the conversation was about. But it gave him something to think about, and he went away and thought about it and shows up at his son's house, at his son's apartment, and tries to be more understanding isn't quite the word, but trying to not make his son feel like he's being lectured to or trying to be forced into do something he doesn't want to do. And they end with kind of a rapprochement where things seem like they might be able to move forward, but you're not sure.
Right.
Things could still go off the rails,
It's still complicated.
Because that's how people are complicated.
All right. Well, we're clearly in the episode phase of this because, you reminded me of one of my favorite episodes, weirdly. And again, I wouldn't necessarily think I would have picked it out, never would have picked it out in my childhood or teens or college years, but I pick it out now. It's called Burnout, and it's season 2, episode 17. Lacey is kind of overwhelmed with all the cop, wife, mother. She's literally counting down the hours and minutes to her vacation. And then her vacation gets pushed because they have to go undercover at the hospital as nuns. And who else can be nuns? And so it's just a day. And she's like, clearly, she's just done. So she just walks out of the station and disappears. But it's really about her hitting that limit of trying to have it all. That was a lot of the 80s and particularly directed at women. Like, okay, you want to be in the workplace? Great. Just be perfect at being a mom and a workplace person and a wife and take care of doing it all. And she's so done. And she ends up just sort of going to the beach, riding the train. She never gets off the train. She ends up at some, New York beach. I don't know, wherever that is. And kind of sits on the beach, and then this very unusual woman comes up to her. And at first I'm like, did they send her? That gets a little weird in some ways, just the meat of it. Once you get into it, it's Jennifer Warren, who you would recognize as sort of a guest star actress. She's done a lot of television and TV movies. But what was interesting is that nobody knows where she is. Mm-hmm. Harvey finally hears from her, and she's like, I just need a minute. I'm safe. I'm sorry. I'll get back to you. And then she hangs up. And then Harvey shows up to the precinct and really starts haranguing Lieutenant Samuels for basically, overworking her. But Lieutenant Samuels basically harangues Harvey for overworking her at home. But then also Harvey's like, no, I'm taking care of this, this, and this. And Lieutenant Samuels is like, you sound like my ex-wife. And I was like, that is such an insult, right? To men, right? What an insult at that time. So Harvey has to go back at him with, well, you ruined your whole family. That's why your wife left, And so they just tear at each other in some ways in a very verbal way, in a very kind of mean way, because they're both upset that Lacey's missing. And then they have to back off of it. They actually do, again, have to realize like, okay, we are both upset about this other thing. It just was so interesting, the dialogue and that scene and what it was saying about gender roles and responsibility and what the pressures of the job were. And I just thought that was really amazing.
I don't know that I've seen anything like that on any other television show anywhere. Where
Certainly between two men.
Yeah. Where the husband of our leading lady is having this argument with her boss about her burnout and how come you're not helping her? I mean, that just, it's incredible. It's an incredible scene.
Because it's, the Bechdel test, right? Like two women having a conversation together that's not about men. This is two men having a conversation that is about a woman.
Yes.
And that's rare. That's not just about, is she hot? But is who f***ed up? I can't say that. We'll bleep it. I just thought it was a really interesting episode because it was recognizable, particularly when Dashiell was little and I had stepkids and it was 3 kids and I was working at Disney, no, I wasn't working at Disney. I was consulting, but it was a lot. It was a lot. And felt like I was doing none of it well. And so I was like, yeah, okay. But it was also that feeling of I'm losing what's me. as a person
Mhm.
because I'm sort of making sure that everything is taken care of outside. And she has this line in there that I already promised too much of myself to too many people. And I thought that was really telling for a lot of women. What was interesting is that's the A story. The B story is the case. Usually the A story is the case
Mhm.
and the B story is the personal story. But in this one, it's clearly the A story. And that I thought was really interesting. And the B story is, so Cagney and his Becky have to go undercover. So Cagney is a nun and his Becky is a hospital orderly, which you're like, well, they could have come up with that before.
And let her go on her
And let her
vacation.
go on her vacation. And there would be like, we could move on to a different episode and she'd get a break. But because somebody's stealing drugs from the hospital. And it was sort of nice to have, as Becky and Cagney have a couple of scenes together. But I got to tell you, Sharon Gless looks great as a nun. Like she looks amazing. You're like, oh, she makes a great nun. And then two sort of fun things happen in that episode that are sort of, again, nice balances to the harder drama of the A story. But it's that is Becky gets upset because one of the doctors like hits on Cagney as a nun. And when the doctor was like, hey, we could get some dinner together or something, and then walks away. And is Becky's like, you can't do that. He thinks you're a nun. And I'm like, oh, okay. So there is a line for his Becky. So, okay. But then, of course, also that doctor turns out to be the one stealing the drugs because clearly he's a so. What was great is then Cagney gets to chase him down as a nun and reach down and pull out her gun from her ankle holster under her nun's habit. So I thought that was just really, there were some fun elements to that.
And in general, they do a good job of that kind of balance in each episode with this going on over here versus something maybe lighter or something. It's a delicate balance, which they seem to handle very, very well because it never feels like things are just kind of out of whack in terms of what's going on in various places within the precinct.
There's some. The only thing is that there's a couple episodes that are a little bit slow. I mean, and it's interesting because you're like, okay, you cannot waste that kind of time on network television now. You just got to move it along. I mean, come on. But there's a B story. It is an episode that is actually about undercover police officer is accused of being gay because it's found out during the middle of an investigation that he had previously posed for nude pictures that end up in a gay magazine at the time this is going down. And I'll remember the name of that episode in a minute. But the B story to that, which is, and that unfolds in a really interesting way, which again is one of the episodes that we're going to look at in season 2 when we look at sort of LGBTQ and queer representation in 80s television and 70s and 90s television. Because again, it's very subtle. It's very Cagney and Lacey in that it's not on the nose, but it covers a lot of really interesting discussions around things that people weren't discussing in a very subtle and yet enlightened for the time way. And one of the things that struck me in there, though, the B story is basically all of the cops in the precinct have submitted to this lottery. And whether it's like the New York lottery or a state lottery, I don't quite know what the lottery is, but the beginning of the B story is all of them getting the lottery tickets. And then you watch each of them scratch off their ticket. And it takes forever. Like, and they each have a different way of doing it. And Petrie is like, I do mine last. And he does, and he wins for them, right? So they've all pooled. They're all in the pool. And then it's the question of, I guess then you can go, okay, we can give up the $100 win for the $1,000 chance. And then they win the $1,000 chance or whatever it is, but then they can give that up for the big prize. And so they have to decide collectively what they're doing. And so it gets more interesting, but there's several shots, long, lingering shots of these cops scratching off lottery tickets. And I was like, I didn't know what to do with that. as a viewer that's used to television moving at a different
Much
pace.
faster.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
wonder if it, like you were saying, the product placement with the microwave, I wonder if it was kind of like, well, that's when the scratchers first came out, because scratchers were not always around. You just played numbers.
Oh my God, you
And
might
so
be right.
they
wow.
like took the time to explain it.
You might be right.
On the Pluto, I've been watching The Outer Limits from 1963.
Wow.
Oh, it's a riot. You have to watch it. It's like laugh out loud stuff. These actors, they're excellent actors. Without these actors, it would be hard. It'd be unwatchable because they are acting their hearts out. You know, like totally Ed Wood, like Eddie Albert wrestling a branch. You know, like it's
Yes.
time to kill him. It's wonderful. But besides that, there is so much exposition that you're like, wow, that like just walking him down the hall, you know, like today you would just cut to the next room,
Yes. Yes.
or they'd like show an airplane flying because you had to
And
be sure you knew they
landing.
were flying. Yeah. That they were actually flying somewhere else, where now it'd be just like cut to Europe and they're there. So I think it really has to do with the learning curve of visual
storytelling.
storytelling.
Yeah. And I think that is such an interesting thing because I was like somewhat perplexed in the middle of that story that it felt like pretty early on things slowed down. So we had these, I was like, you would never get away with that now. It'd be like, yes, we see him. We get it.
Move it
moving on.
along. We don't need this. Yeah.
Especially because they need that extra time for more commercials, at least on network television. But even on streaming where there are no commercials, yeah, they would never do that because the audience is not used to that and wouldn't know what to do or how to, it just wouldn't work.
Well, I'm also going to shout out one of my favorite episodes being season 1, episode 1 with Meg Foster. I thought that it feels a little on the nose because they start off as basically sex workers are being killed. And so you're going to be on the job as the female prostitutes. And so it feels a little bit like pandering to a particular audience.
But I would imagine though that there was some truth to that, oh, we've got these women here. What are we going to do with them? Oh yeah, we'll just have them go over here and stand on the street corner and pretend to be hookers because
hookers are being killed. So go be the police officer. But what I like about those, the lost 6 episodes or the first season, those 6, they're clearly sort of figuring out the show, right? And what the show is going to be. And I think Meg Foster does a pretty good job. I don't have a problem with Meg Foster. I find her pretty good. And yet there is something that pops in their relationship when Sharon Gless comes in, because I like the first episode of season 2 as well, which starts in the middle of a sort of dramatic case of a person that's shot. And then there's a question of, was there a gun? And I think Cagney saw a gun, Lacey did not. And there's a big argument over, you have to back me. And it's like, but I didn't see the gun. I can't say something that it wasn't true. It just is a really great way to kind of reestablish who these characters are with a new actress playing Cagney. But I don't know. It's interesting. I would love to get Meg Foster on this show someday.
that would be awesome. Love to hear what her thoughts were about her time on the show, and certainly hear about what she's done since.
And I would love to get Barbara Corday on this show because she's got both this story and I'm sure 1,000 other stories. You know, it's so interesting, the timeline of this. Like so Barbara Avedon and Barbara Corday wrote Cagney and Lacey and developed it with Barney for Barney because he wanted to do a buddy movie, basically. He wanted to do a Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid with 2 women. And it ended up being, can you make them cops? And as it gets developed, it basically turned into the Cagney and Lacey TV movie. But I mean, he tried to sell that as a movie, as a television show, as TV movie. And as he tells in our first episode with him, part 1, it wasn't selling. And people didn't want it. 2 women? What? You're crazy. Get out of here. Get out of my office. No, they were like, yeah, okay, no. But then they did want it at CBS for a TV movie. But by that time, Barbara Avedon and Barbara Corday were no longer writing partners. And Barbara Corday, in fact, was in television development. So she could help. And so I think basically Barney and Barbara Avedon wrote that script, but Barbara Avedon and Barbara Corday were credited with it because they wrote various versions of that script. And this is, again, based on what Barney has said in the book. And then when they say, okay, we're going to make the show, Barbara Corday is now a vice president at Columbia Television. And so again, she's going to act as a consulting producer, but she can't be on the ground with that show. So he hires Barbara Avedon, but Barbara Avedon freaks out about the time frame because he's also promised to deliver scripts in a very tight time frame, and they don't even know quite how they're going to make this as a show. So she actually sort of basically calls above him, does the thing you can't do, which is leap over your producer and talk to the studio or the network and say, oh, this is not going to happen. And so she ends up fired, right? And then Barney has no women on his team, really, for a show about two women. And I will say, over the course of that show, what he did do is put women on the team. And Barney is such an interesting person because he's such a conundrum. He is old school Hollywood producer. Like, he is going to push hard. He is going to use whatever he's got. He is going to sort of ride the horse past the time that it's upside down. Like, it just, nope, it's still going. We're still going to keep this alive. He's going to work it all the way beyond the end and win the day. And yet, he created arguably the most feminist show on television in 1982 and continued to deliver on putting women in places of power, both behind the scenes and in front of that show. And that's huge. The number of women, as we said, it seems small, but compared to even now, it's pretty good. The numbers that we talked about with Sharon Gless, in the Sharon Gless episode, out of 42 directors listed on IMDb, 13 female directors. That's a 31% ratio at the time. Unprecedented.
And a number of them did multiple episodes. It's not like it was come and direct an episode, see you later.
Yeah.
Yeah, they kept coming back.
Yeah. And out of 81 writers, 30 women, almost 40%. Again, yesterday. That's a pretty great number. Like, that's a pretty great percentage. And like you said, women got more than one episode. He basically, had to be talking to every working female director in Hollywood at the time and saying, are they available? Do they want to come on this show? So the notable directors, female directors, Karen Arthur, of course, who we had on for this show. I love her.
I know. Me too.
She's great. She did 8 episodes of Cagney and Lacey.
That sounds
won an Emmy
yeah.
for Heat.
Mm-hmm.
Sharon Miller actually did 10 episodes of Cagney and Lacey. She's also a director on The Paper Chase, LA Law, China Beach, The Trials of Rosie O'Neill. She's in The Family, and That's Life. She did several episodes of That's Life. Oh, and what I also forgot is the pilot was directed by Tyne Daly's husband, George Stanford Brown, who directed 5 episodes of Cagney and Lacey. I do love the little okay, we're all in the family. You're in the family. You're in the family. Let's go.
And it wasn't until we started doing this podcast and the first round of looking into Cagney and Lacey that I realized that he was a director. I knew him from the show he was on, so I knew he was an actor, but I did not know he was a director as well.
I think I knew he was a director too because of looking up the rookies, and because I think he had directed some, I don't know. I just sort of did know. I didn't realize he had directed as much as he's directed. Mm-hmm. He is as much a director as an actor. Yeah. Pretty amazing. And then the writers on this show, Georgia Jeffries, 2 Emmy nominations for writing on Cagney and Lacey, also went on to write for China Beach, won 2 Writers Guild Awards for Cagney and Lacey episodes. Pretty amazing writer who started with a spec for this show. I think she was writing specs, so she may have written a couple other specs, but, came onto the show as a writer's room writer after writing a spec for this show. And then Sharon Elizabeth Doyle was a playwright who became a TV writer, worked on Cagney and Lacey, and then 21 Jump Street and the Nero Wolfe Mysteries.
I have to say, I do like the number of Sharons that are on this show. There's a plethora of them.
There's a lot of Sharons. You're right. I'm saying it and I didn't even recognize it. A lot of Sharons. All right. Shelley List, with her husband and business partner, Jonathan Estrin, were big TV writers and producers, but significant for this show as well. April Smith, Patricia Green. And then a lot of what's interesting is both for Remington Steele and this show, and a little bit for Scarecrow, a lot of those TV writers actually went on to become novelists, including Peter Lefcourt and April Smith, who wrote 4 episodes of Cagney and Lacey, along with many other 80s TV shows, who went on to write the books Be the One and Good Morning Killer, which she then adapted into a TV movie in 2011. She also happened to write the remake movie version of Taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3. So the mystery writers clearly went on to do mystery novels, which makes sense. But they also, you saw names in that show, not just in the writer-director level, but also in a lot of positions that you didn't necessarily see on other shows. And it makes a huge difference. The way you get work as a director is directing television episodes. And so the more work you do as a television director, the more work you can get. And so being able to do 5 episodes of Cagney and Lacey makes a huge difference to the rest of your career than doing 1.
Because someone's got to open that door for you and say, come on in, show us what you got.
Yeah. And Karen Arthur sort of credits the Emmy with, doing Cagney and Lacey. She did the episode that got her an Emmy, and that Emmy opened more doors for her. And so that Emmy was for Heat, which we talk about on that episode a little bit more, but it was season 5, episode 2. But it was originally shot to be the first episode of that season. I do know that. But it starts without the opening credits because it's a very serious episode. And so I think they moved it to the second. It was such an unusual, stylistically different show from the rest of the show that they decided not to open the season with it.
Yeah, it had no B story or C story. It was just this story with Lacey getting essentially kidnapped or held hostage by this alleged bank robber killer. I can't remember exactly what crime he committed.
An unstable personality with a gun, played by Michael Madsen, and held hostage by a dangerous man. And if you went, oh, this was in one take, one shot, you'd believe it because it has that feeling of claustrophobia. It's not shot like that, but from the start of that episode that it's being shot very differently. A new cinematographer had come on the show, and that's where Karen met that new cinematographer that she ended up marrying.
Tom Neuwirth.
Tom Neuwirth, yes, was the new DP brought on the show. Because by this point, I believe that Sharon Gless and Barney Rosenzweig were having an affair. And previous to that affair, or maybe even during, Sharon Gless had been dating the previous cinematographer of the show, Hector Figueroa, the DP for 35 episodes of Cagney and Lacey. Yes, they both talk about these in their books and are very forthcoming.
Yeah.
And take a lot of responsibility for these choices of theirs. The behind the scenes on this show is very interesting. So Barney and Barbara Corday were married until kind of the middle of this show. I think around season 2 or 3, their marriage ends. And then later, Barney would go on to marry Sharon Gless.
And they are still married.
Yes. And so a lot of very interesting behind the scenes on this show. And yet they just sort of kept going on the show. And I have to say, everybody's very adult about it now. I'm sure there was a lot of things going down at the time. But it's a high pressure environment, that television making.
Yeah. Television production is a runaway train. It starts up, and it doesn't stop for anything. It just keeps going forward.
By this time, also, Barbara Corday was the head of Columbia Television, president of Columbia Television. So, again, some high-powered people doing high-powered stuff. But I don't know. It's just such an interesting show, and I'm so glad that it ended up running and that Barney ended up fighting so hard for it to become the show it could become, and that women all over the country recognized it, and he talks a little bit about that, about getting people to write in for the show. But now, and the National Organization for Women and several television activists, which were starting up at that time, actually wrote in for the show. And there's a woman, Dorothy Swanson, and she organized the Save the Cagney and Lacey campaign, or was one of the ones that organized that, besides Barney. And then she founded Viewers for Quality Television and helped multiple television shows stay on the air. I think that season 1 and 2, it was on the chopping block. Season 2 to 3, it was again on the chopping block. And then it was sort of allowed to kind of exist, I think, which is crazy.
There just are no words. This show is high quality television. It's winning award after award after award. And yet the network's kind of like, I don't know. Do we really want to keep it around? Okay. I don't know what more you want, CBS. Come on.
Well, I think, television was both the same and different, right? Like, you had to craft a season and you were making a lot of guesses as to what was going to work within that and where you were going to schedule it. And, the scheduling of this show in its first season almost killed it by putting it after Magnum PI, which you would go, biggest show on TV. Let's go. Everybody watches this show. Everybody who's young. Everybody who wants to look at hot people living crazy lives with Ferraris in Hawaii. Sure, they're going to like the adult 2 women in realistic crime stories. Like, looking at it now, you're like, that would be, why would you ever schedule it that way? But at the time, you're like, oh, this is a hot show. We're going to put it behind another hot show. Detectives, fine. But completely different shows. Like, completely different audiences.
Yeah. And
the audience is important. You got to find your audience.
But once they did, and it was a great big hit, okay. That's what.
Oh, is when yeah.
And listen, I understand enough to know that it's not always about the ratings. It's not always about how good the show is and all those other things. At the end of the day, it is about the bottom line, and not to mention other people's thoughts and feelings about people that make decisions, their thoughts and feelings about shows, which decisions they make that aren't always about what is the best show. It's just, it's often about something else entirely.
Yeah. And then you read about Les Moonves and you realize like it's often about things that have nothing to do with even the best decisions or different decisions or adult decisions or business decisions, but have to do with somebody who should not be in charge of anything.
Exactly. Not that we're saying that had anything to do with this, but
no, I don't think he was there yet.
No,
but
he was still at Warner Brothers, but I don't know who was running CBS, and I'm sure I don't know what they did or didn't do.
I used to pretend that people who were in charge, I used to think like, oh, at some point, if you're in charge and you're successful, you must know what you're doing. But I think we have proven that is not true. And that in fact, most of the time you don't know.
Yes. And certainly experience has taught us both that just because they're in charge doesn't mean they have any idea what they're doing.
None. All right. So what are some of your other favorite episodes of this show?
Well, that's interesting. I had a hard time coming up with favorite episodes. I kept coming back to favorite moments, favorite scenes, maybe favorite storylines, because it all just sort of seems to be one long show almost to me. But I think one of the most amazing things, if not the most amazing thing that I saw on this show was in part 2 of Turn, 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 which is at the end of season 6 when Cagney has to come to terms with the fact that, yes, she, like her father, is an alcoholic. And the scene between Cagney and Lacey, when Lacey comes to her apartment after she's just been on this 2-day bender after her father passes away. That scene, it felt like it was like 20 minutes and it's just the two of them in this room together. And it was astonishing, absolutely astonishingly acted. astonishingly written, and I get goosebumps when I think about it.
Yeah, the both of those episodes, Turn Part 1 and Turn Part 2, they're just, again, these kind of amazing, they're almost movies. Like, you know, and you know, of course, television does that now very well in some ways, but at the time in the 80s, television was one thing and movies were another thing. And there's something very movie-like about these episodes of Cagney and Lacey in that they're taking time with these scenes.
Mm-hmm. Very much so.
They're very, very character. And you're right.
And I don't know how she did. I don't know how Sharon Gless did that. I don't know how she did that, because that whole episode was her just her character's drunk out of her mind and going through all this.
Yeah. And really swinging from angry to sad to belligerent to violent to bitter and very specifically though. Like, it's really, again, beautiful scenes, very tough scenes. And then the season ends and the episode ends with Cagney at an AA meeting saying she's an alcoholic, because Lacey's basically said, this is over unless you face this, and that you can, and I will help you.
Yeah.
And that, you know, again, was very groundbreaking at the time, that a female character lead of a show would basically say, I'm alcoholic and we're going to stay with them. And it's not, then they're dead. Like, you know, and then they come back in the next season and she's going to AA meetings and is trying to be a non-drinking alcoholic and be a cop and, you know, solve cases.
Yeah.
And it's a pretty great flavor for that show, because it's now sitting there for those characters, right? And I do love the first part 1 of Turn, where Lacey, meanwhile, Lacey has saved a baby from an exploding car, a car wreck, that then she grabs the baby before the car explodes on fire and becomes like a local celebrity and is being lauded. And meanwhile, Cagney's losing her dad and sort of diving into this bender. So the contrast of that, of like, you know, Lacey's career is going up and Cagney's career is going down, and that makes her bitter towards Lacey and not willing to have help at the beginning, I think.
Yeah, it's so rich and so built on all of the years we've been watching these characters together and watching their lives and everything else that they've gone through and been through. And it's just, it's really astonishing.
And I love seeing Harvey always dressed up in, he's always wearing a kitchen apron.
He is often wearing a kitchen apron, yes.
I just love that about Harvey. He's always wearing the kitchen apron, yeah.
And always worried about dinner as well, right? Like, which huge ground, but that makes him the greatest husband and possibly
ever.
Yeah. And he's very understanding, and he wants her to do what she needs to make her, even when he disagrees with Lacey. He's like, well, you have to make that decision. I mean, this is what I think, but you have to make that decision, and I'll back you, even if I don't agree with you.
You know, in a lot of ways, that relationship between the two of them is probably the best, if not one of the best relationships between a married couple that I've ever seen on television. I mean, they know how to fight. They certainly are hot for each other from beginning to end. You know, they trust each other. There's just a level of love and trust and maturity that you just don't see between couples, because maybe because at some point they think they have to break them up or they have to be something other than a united front for there to be enough drama in the show or something. I don't know.
John Karlen, who played Harvey, was really just quite spectacular at, like, he feels like a guy's guy, and yet he's also shifting to adapt to his wife being a cop, and something that was not necessarily part of what he signed up for.
And not only a cop, but for off and on throughout the years, she was the breadwinner.
Yeah.
Because the work he was doing, he either had physical challenges so he couldn't work, or there wasn't work or whatever. And she was the one that was bringing home the paycheck, which then, and I'm sure in some quarters now, is a huge deal. And especially for a blue collar guy. Yeah, that's not
he's
what he's
a construction.
expecting.
Yeah. He's a construction
Yes.
guy who has
Yes.
lost work, and then he's got tinnitus. And so then he can't work on the high building. So he can't do the job he has been doing for years. And again, it's something small, but it's something that's so realistic to people's lives that you're like, how did that show exist? You're sometimes like, how did this show actually exist? I think for a lot of couples, that became a couple that you're like, oh, we're supportive of each other and supportive of this unit that we're building together. And it's a struggle and it's a negotiation. And yet it can be done, it's another way television was teaching us things. Here's how to use a microwave. And here's what a functional, dysfunctional, but trying to be functional relationship is, right? Like that's navigating difficulty. And that was important to see.
Yeah.
It's important to see, oh, here's a way to do it. And here's what it looks like to try to be a supportive ally in your marriage, in your relationship. Yeah. It's very interesting. He passed away, I want to say like 2019, not that long ago.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh.
And because I looked to see about getting him on the show because I thought that would be great. But he was very proud of the show. And yeah.
For some reason, I would have thought if I had to guess, it would have been much earlier than that. I'm glad it wasn't. But I'm sorry, we obviously couldn't get him on the show.
It was 2020, January of 2020.
Wow.
So it was, yeah. And just like, and then the cast was just sort of interesting. And most of that cast came from the TV movie. Like, I'm going to give Barney another credit for basically being loyal. Like, if he could get him back, he got him back. Carl Lumley as Mark Petrie, Al Waxman as Lieutenant Burt Samuels, Martin Cove as Isbecki, Victor Isbecki, and Sidney Clute as Detective LaGuardia. And Sidney Clute passed away during the show.
Lieutenant LaGuardia, he was the guy with the bow tie,
The bow
right?
tie, yeah. Very, very recognizable
Classic.
character, actor. I think, and Richard said, I think he wore the same outfit in every television show. But he was in everything. He was in a Chips and Battlestar, the original Battlestar Galactica and Charlie's Angels and, just everything. And he passed away during the show, but they kept his name in the credits for the whole show.
Yeah,
for all the seasons.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So I really love that, that it felt like a family in a lot of ways. Oh, and one of the things I want to talk about before we sort of wrap up is number one on the call sheet and what happened with that.
Oh,
so
please.
Obviously, TV movie. Tyne Daly she had done stuff, but she wasn't incredibly well known. She was known in theater and she had done some television. Loretta Swit, huge star.
Yeah, everybody knew her.
Off MASH.
Yeah.
She was number one on the call sheet. It was a Loretta Swit TV movie, also starring Tyne Daly. But Tyne Daly Tyne Daly held her own in that. She doesn't have as much screen time. And that's a shame because you want it to be more partnery. I think at the end it became more Loretta Swit-y. But anyway, the TV movies, but when the show comes on, Tyne Daly is the more well-known one. Meg Foster is not. Tyne Daly is number one on the call sheet for season 1. Meg Foster goes away. Sharon Gless is brought onto the show. Sharon Gless is a bigger star than Tyne Daly at the time because she had starred in several television shows by that point and was better known. And basically, was supposed to get top billing and was supposed to get a certain rate. So they bring Tyne's rate up to match Sharon's. So they make the same money. But now there's a big discussion on who's going to be both number one on the call sheet, but the first name, right? And they both deserve it, right? So they hashed it out. I mean, Barney was part of this, but my understanding is that they hashed it out. And
Sharon Gless and Tyne Daly.
Yeah, Sharon sort of alludes to this in her interview where she's like, well, and then Tyne came over, brought champagne, and we worked it out. We worked out some credit things, but it's fine. And then she kind of moves on. But I believe it was a huge discussion and a huge thing, because being that number one means the next thing you're like getting to these levels in Hollywood is a pay rate and your next job. It's where you start for your next job.
Yeah, it was a demotion for Daly.
But it wasn't. So what they did, you'll notice that often their names are on at the same time. And then when they're not, they rotate it. So one episode will have Sharon's name first and then Tyne. And then the next episode had to have Tyne's name and then Sharon's. So they technically shared it. And yet I don't know who is actually number one on the call sheet.
Well, maybe if
no one will ever know,
depending on, one episode, this one, maybe for that episode on the call sheet, they're number one.
Maybe they flip number one on the call sheet.
Yeah. And then the next episode, when it's Sharon Gless, who's number one on screen, she's number one on the call sheet. I mean, that would in some ways make sense. I mean, it'd be a little confusing for everybody, but still.
Very confusing.
Yeah, I think.
For the crew, and how you put down yeah.
No, I thought that was very interesting because my guess is that hopefully these two women were some of the highest paid women in television at the time this show ended.
I hope so.
Yeah, I do too.
And what women get paid still to this day is less on average than what men get paid.
Yep.
And particularly in television. And for women of color, it's worse. Like embarrassingly so. Like they should publish things to make sure that people know how absurd it is. But I think it was very important that both these women take the stand for their position and sort of very in keeping with the show, right?
Yeah.
Mary Beth Lacey wasn't as ambitious as Christine Cagney, but she was determined to be the best cop, as good as Christine Cagney. Like she would hold her service up, right? Like it was equal value. She didn't have to be like, I don't have to be lieutenant. I'm going to put in my time, but I will never be a lesser cop than you.
Right.
Which I thought was again, for women to have both of those models of, you can be ambitious and you can want to be number one at the call sheet and number one, you want to go all the way to the president of Coca-Cola or Columbia Television. Go for it. Be that. Or you just want to make something really cool or be a cop and that is at the highest level of your job.
Yeah.
And respected for it. Yeah. So that's what that show really gave us, is two models. And every other show is giving us one model. If that, right? Every other female-driven show of the time. I mean, as great as Remington Steele is, Laura Holt is on her own. She is not in partnership with another woman on that show, even when there's another woman on that show.
Right.
She's not working in partnership with that other woman. Scarecrow Mrs. King. Kate Jackson is not working in partnership with another woman. She and Francine are both agents, but they are not working in partnership on that show. And then Golden Girls, they're all friends. It's great. I would say Designing Women is the only thing that might be there. And in some ways, for me, being a sitcom, it's a little bit less, which may not be fair.
Well, no, I think the drama versus comedy of it does make a difference.
Yeah.
Mainly because of the stories they tell and how they tell them. Funny outweighs everything when they're in a comedy and not necessarily, not in a drama. Dramas can be both. I mean, sitcoms can be both too. And comedies can be both, but the comedy is what drives the story in the comedy. At least it's supposed to.
Anyway, well, this has been amazing. We could talk clearly about Cagney and Lacey for days.
Yes, many more hours of things to talk about. But like all good things must come to an end.
At least for now. I was excited to look at it again. I knew that I would like it, but I didn't think I would find it as rich.
I didn't either.
As I did. And then the episodes, if you haven't listened to those and you just started with us, go check them out. We interviewed Barney Rosenzweig, Sharon Gless, Tyne Daly, and director Karen Arthur. Yeah. And they're all just incredible. Okay, so we're going to take a little break and come back. We'll be right back. All right, Sharon, welcome back.
In today's audiography, we'd like to shout out Cagney and Lacey Appreciation Facebook group. Lots of cool people there who love the show.
And we have a special guest, our 80s TV Ladies theme song singer and creator. Thank you for dropping by, Amy Englehart.
Hello.
Woo.
Hello. Nice to meet you.
Well, we've met in person, which is how
We've met, yes.
we met through our mutual friend Kat Sherrill, currently musical director on Hamilton Tour.
Ah.
And then I found out that you were in the Bobs, an a cappella group that Sharon and I both know about because of our mutual friend Brittany. And so we were like, oh, we're getting her on the show. Oh, she's going to be writing our song.
I'm a longtime big fan of the Bobs.
Oh.
Was so thrilled when Susan mentioned that you would be working on the songs for the show. So very, very, very nice to meet you as well.
Oh, how cool is that? I have to say that it was my honor and a privilege to continue their demented legacy, to both inherit it and continue it and warp minds moving forward.
Well, and speaking of warped minds moving forward, I was so excited you said yes to creating the theme song for 80s TV Ladies. And when I said, hey, we might do some other crazy songs, you were like, let's go.
Hello, that's my life, is doing crazy music, is doing theater music and silly stuff and parodies and stuff like that.
And I wish we could do them for every episode, but we have to be selective about what songs we create. But 80s TV Ladies, which was, the kickoff, and is so sticky. People are very, very both happy and sad how sticky that song is.
Well, it's funny because when we originally talked about it, you had an idea of how the riff might go. And all I could think of was, when I read your lyrics, was "It's a living." And, aren't we cool with our shoulders up to here, suits, and designing women and all the things that, of course, I was watching. I was in my teens.
Well, hopefully we'll be having you back to create some more for season 2. But meanwhile, you're going to do something huge.
I am.
You're going to have a show in the Edinburgh Fringe Festival. I would argue the most famous Fringe festival in the world. Tell us about your one-woman show, Impact.
The bombing of Pan Am 103 over Lockerbie, Scotland in 1988. I'm a Syracuse University alum, and 35 Syracuse students were on that plane. I had done the program 3 years before it, and so I knew 5 of the people on board from the drama department. My show is called Impact, and it is about the decision to follow these over 35 different coincidences and kind of magical linings up and connections to Lockerbie to say yes and to be rewarded on the trip with a discovery of the best in people in the worst of circumstances. It is not a musical, but it does have 5 pieces of music in it. And I play piano, and I'm also accompanied by cello and percussion. And there's projections and videos and like a multimedia scrapbook of the journey. Ultimately, it amounts to asking the question, Impact, what can we all do for each other in the face of tragedy? And how can we make the world better for each other when it isn't going to stop being worse? What can anyone do who isn't like a world leader moving forward? I think it was Mr. Rogers who famously said, look for the helpers. And Impact is a celebration of the helpers.
Wow.
So I am honored to be taking it to the Edinburgh Festival. And if you told me that I would be doing something like this, because normally I write comedy, I'm a hard-ass chick from New Jersey who has a potty mouth, but I can still be that. I just want to point out these two things are not mutually exclusive.
We contain multitudes.
Yes.
You
Thank
contain
you.
multitudes, Amy.
Thank you. And I'll be in the opening weekend in June of the National Women's Theater Festival in Raleigh, North Carolina.
Fantastic.
Then I will be taking it to
Edinburgh. And I have actually launched a campaign to help fund it.
Awesome.
So yeah, I am funding it through a company called Fractured Atlas, which behaves as a 501c3. So that means that when people contribute to a production such as Impact going to Edinburgh specifically, they get a tax deduction for their contribution.
So you can find out more at fundraising.fracturedatlas.org/impact. And it'll be in the description in our audiography.
Awesome.
As will amyenglehart.com and facebook.com/impact3030, in which you can follow the journey to Edinburgh, I bet.
Yeah. I have talkbacks after every performance. And the things that people have shared have been amazing. And gosh, if I can turn things around for people for even 15 minutes, for them to be thinking in a more positive way, that's really rewarding.
That's what we need right now. I think we need theater more than ever because it's that connection. If you are an artist listening to this podcast, you should know that fracturedatlas.org is actually open to individual artists as well as small organizations who need a 501c3 sponsor. They also provide other elements in support of artists, and that can be from dance to visual art, I believe, to theater and music.
And I think what makes Fractured Atlas stand out is that their mission is to serve artists and to serve arts organizations.
So it's great. Well, this has been great. We could talk all day. We'll have you back on the show so we can talk about how it went in Edinburgh and then also more about 80s television and songwriting, maybe.
I would love to talk about that. Oh, I'm very happy to be here. And congratulations on the first season.
Thank you. Have a great time in Edinburgh,
Scotland.
Scotland. Yeah, well, that'll be in August, so I'll see you way before
we'll
then.
see you before then. Great.
fantastic.
Okay, cool.
All right.
All right. So plenty of time for people to go help Amy get to Scotland.
Excellent.
Thank you so much, you guys.
We want to wish you a happy Mother's Day from Sharon and I at 80s TV Ladies. In honor of this holiday, we want to shout out a special Mother's Day episode.
We recommend checking out the Mother's Day episode of Golden Girls, Season 3, Episode 25, where the girls, who are all mothers themselves, recall past Mother's Days.
It's kind of sweet.
That sounds wonderful. Should we all say Happy Mother's Day together?
Oh, yeah.
Melissa, you too.
Okay.
Happy Mother's Day. Send us your audiography. Send us your favorite 80s TV ladies, books, websites, and shows.
Thank you all for listening and for making our first season of 80s TV Ladies just spectacular. We love getting your feedback and we love your support. It has been so great.
It's been such an amazing journey to do this show, and it just keeps getting better and better.
Your support helps us make more episodes, whether that's a like and comment on social media, a rating or review on Apple Podcast, or supporting us monthly on patreon.com/80s TV Ladies. We so appreciate the love, the support, and the conversation. We want to thank Sullivan Lewis and Sean Galeska at Concept Lab Marketing, the 90s TV Babies, Sarita Fontanesi, Sergio Perez, and Megan Rubel. Chris Stashu for being our friend, and Chris and Mike White at Weirding Way Media.
80s TV Ladies is produced by 134 West and Susan Lambert Haddam. Our producers are Richard Haddam and Melissa Roth. Sound engineer and editor is Kevin Ducey. Assistant sound work provided by Izzy Galashaw. And our associate producer is Sergio Perez. Our theme song is by Amy Englehart. Our next episode will be the first of season 2. I can't believe we're already at season 2.
It's crazy. Please join us as we kick off our season 2 with the degree in advanced TV herstory. We'll be bringing on podcaster Cynthia Bemis Abrams to talk 80s television and women making herstory.
We hope 80s TV Ladies brings you joy and laughter and lots of fabulous new and old shows to watch, all of which will lead us forward toward being amazing ladies of the 21st century.
See you next season.